We all have heard the concept of as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Well, I know that more than anybody else. Maybe that's not true, but I know that really deeply within me because I experienced it when I was younger in a negative aspect. And I'm experiencing it as I'm older and as I'm building a business. There's things that I'm thinking about myself that are actually hindering me and keeping me from building the business that I want to build. So, to get started with this, we're going to dig into this in this video of how that works and how we can change the way that we think about ourselves so that we can show up better and actually build the businesses that we want to build. Because the simple reality is the reason we're not successful has less to do with the actions that we're taking and more to do with the way we think about ourselves and how we're then taking the actions. So we're going to look at that and I'm going to explain it and we're going to see how that works. And this starts off with myself. Let's look at the negative part of this because when I was younger, my teenage years were a mess. When I was 14, my dad passed away. And when my dad passed away, I had this mindset. I grew up in a religious setting, and I was Amish actually, so the most religious setting you can think of and the most conservative setting. And we believed that everything that happened in life was God ordained. So everything that happened, good or bad, was from God, from the heart of God. So therefore, when my dad passed away, I believed that God was judging me. I believed that I wasn't good enough, and therefore I wasn't good enough for God. I was not good enough to have a dad. And so my self worth and my self esteem took a big hit. Like I did not think of myself well. Like I thought I was worthless. I thought I wasn't worthy. I thought I was awful, an awful person. And so with that mindset, what happened over the next couple of years was really detrimental. My teenager years were a mess because of this mindset. And when I was 15, we ended up moving away from the Amish church, went to a conservative Mennonite church about an hour south. So I went to a whole new community. And when I went into that community, I developed friends right away. And a lot of these friends came kind of out of pity because they heard my story and they knew that I had lost my dad. So they became friends in a sense, right? But over that next year, when I was 16, I lost all of my friends. I had one guy that was like 8 years older than me that stuck to me. And I remember going out to eat with him one time, and in the restaurant, I'm sitting there crying, trying to hold back the tears. But the tears are just streaming down my face because I was just telling him how I felt, how worthless I felt, and that I didn't feel like I had any friends. But this guy stuck with me, which is awesome. And I had that one guy that stuck with me. But essentially, when I look back at that and I look at that and I can say, oh, it was all the friends' fault. It was all their fault of how they saw me and all these different things, how they treated me. It was their fault, right? But the simple reality is that there was something deeper going on. And the deeper thing that was going on is that in myself, I had rejected myself. And because I had rejected myself and I saw myself as worthless, then it caused the way that I showed up and the actions that I took. Because here's the idea: identity, your self perception of yourself will create your actions, and then your actions will determine your outcomes. So that's what happened with me is my self identity was broken. It was bad. And where I didn't see myself as worthy, I saw myself as somebody that was just worth being rejected, as a rejected, discarded piece of trash. That's what I saw myself as. And so my actions lined up with that to where I showed up with insecurity. I pushed myself onto friends. I invited rejection because I was rejecting myself and all these different things. So I was a pain to be around. I was a hard friend to have because of the way that I saw myself. But the way I saw myself produced my actions, which then produced the outcome of losing friends because they didn't want to hang out with me. I was awful to hang out with. Let's just be honest. But that's the way the system rolls. And as much as I wanted to blame them, when I started to see this, the way I was showing up was just insecure and completely pointless. Then naturally, I started seeing how I was actually the problem, and that's how I started recognizing that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And this became even more real when I went to ministry school. Because when I went to ministry school, I was the same broken, depressed, anxious child, and that was rejecting himself. But when I went to ministry school, I started seeing the goodness of God. And when my eyes opened to the goodness of God and I started seeing Christ within me, and I started seeing that I'm valued, that I'm loved, that I matter, that I'm a powerful being and and I'm a son, I'm a daughter, I belong. Like I started seeing those elements of myself, the way that God saw me. Then all of a sudden, my actions changed. I actually became more attractive because I started to see myself differently. Again, my identity shifted. I started seeing myself as somebody who was loved, someone who could show up well, someone who was a joyful lover, someone who people enjoy being around. I started identifying myself as that person, as a beloved son of God. And as I started seeing myself as that person, then all of a sudden my actions changed because the way I showed up to people, way I showed up to people around me, it didn't make it about myself anymore. I made it about the people around me. And so I showed up in this love and in this joy and this happy-go-lucky joy, and people want it. The result was people wanted to be around me. They wanted to experience that because I showed up better. And so in this, so I took this and I really saw it as it was, right? And so identity will always produce certain actions, which will always produce certain outcomes. So if you're looking at your business and you're wondering, why is it that I'm struggling so hard to be successful? It comes down to those things where your identity is out of place, it's out of alignment who God created you to be. Your identity is out of place, and therefore it's causing actions that are actually self-sabotaging your business. And then, which the outcome is then you're not having the success that you need and you want. So somewhere in that process, you need to change your identity. Simply, reality is when you shift your identity, then your actions will shift and your outcomes will shift. So we're going to look at how do we shift our identity, and that's what this is all about. Is how do we take our identity that has self-sabotage attached to it, insecurities, and all the different all the stuff that we hate about ourselves attached to it. How do we get rid of those things and then replace it with a better identity and a better way to see ourselves so that our actions are better, so the way we show up is better, and so therefore our outcomes are better. How do we do this? What's the practical way of doing this? So let's break that down, and it starts off very practical. Number one is you have to recognize the gap. Because the simple reality is the reason that we mess up in our businesses and the reason we get those mistakes that we get and we self-sabotage and all those things comes down to that identity, right? And so there's a gap between who we know we want to be and we should be for our business and who we actually are showing up as. There's this gap, right? And we can see that gap. And a lot of times what happens is we'll see that gap, but we will judge ourselves according to that gap and we'll condemn ourselves and it won't show up well. This is how you recognize the gap. One, you look at your vision. What is your vision? What do you want to become? Like, what kind of business do you want? Like, if I want a 7-figure business that's serving a lot of people, that has a team attached to it, that's simple to run, that I get to show up well with, like, that's a vision that I have, right? So we get clear on our vision. But then I look at, okay, how am I who do I need to become to run this kind of business? That's the second thing you want to look at. Who do I need to become to run this type of business? Because the simple reality is that if I have a 7-figure business vision, but I'm doing it with a 5-figure identity, then there's a disconnect there. There's a gap there. And if there's a gap there, then I'm never going to, no matter what I do, the actions that I take, I'll self-sabotage and I'll keep myself from stepping into this 7-figure vision. So again, I want you to catch that. You can't build a 7-figure vision, a 7-figure business with a 5-figure mindset. Like, it doesn't work because there's a disconnect. So we need to recognize what that gap is. Take your vision and look at who do I need to become to make this vision a reality. One, like for myself, if I have this 7-figure vision, then I need to show up as a confident leader. I need to show up as a collaborator who collaborates well with people. I need to show up as someone who really cares about people in every moment, and not just myself and not just numbers. I need to show up really consistently in my daily routine. Those are ways I need to show up, right? To be able to do this. To have a 7-figure identity, to attach a mindset that goes with a 7-figure vision. But if instead I look at myself and look at my own life, I'm like, oh shoot, I lack confidence in my direction right now. Then I know if I lack confidence in my direction and I'm always questioning it instead of building, then then that's a 5-figure mindset trying to build a 7-figure business. And there's a gap there. It's not going to work. It's not going to compute. It's not going to go together. So I need to identify that. Or if I'm looking at myself and like, oh shoot, I'm afraid of collaborating and working with people because of times in my past where it didn't work out, right? And so I can let my past dictate, or I can say, no, wait a second, I can learn how to be a good collaborator. And so, again, that could be a disconnect, right? I'm afraid of collaborating. Could be a disconnect. And don't think I can lead a movement. Ooh, that's a disconnect. That's a 5-figure mindset trying to build a 7-figure vision. Or another one could be I second guess myself and I'm way too self focused over here. And so I'm like, okay, that's a gap of where this is how I'm showing up now versus how I want to show up. Or I can say I'm inconsistent in my routine. If I look at myself and recognize, ooh, I'm inconsistent. I'm not showing up well. I'm not going to bed at the same time. I'm not waking up well. I don't have a good morning wake up routine to keep me in this place that I need to be so I can show up well for people that I'm serving. I'm like, okay, so again, a 5-figure mindset and actions will not lead to a 7-figure business. That's as simple as that, right? And so there's an obvious gap in how I want to show up and how I'm currently showing up and how I want to show up. So you have to take time to recognize that gap. Where is the gap? And again, don't look at this from a state of judgment and condemnation, because it's easy to do that. It's easy to say, shoot, I'm showing up in this way. This means I'm bad. And then we start condemning ourselves and feeling guilty and all that stuff. And that doesn't serve you. But this is just objectively looking at the fact of the matter and saying, oh, I need to shift this. This needs to shift, right? And so that's the first thing we have to do, is to have to objectively look at the facts and look at, okay, this is the vision that I have, and this is how I know I need to show up when I have this vision, and this is how I'm currently showing up. So there's this vision gap there, right? There's this gap of how I'm showing up. So recognize the gap. That's the first thing we want to do. The second thing we want to do, and this is the thing that sets us apart from anybody else in the way of the world, is we have to recognize Christ within us. And this is what I mean by that. Because the simple reality is that gap, we recognize the gap, but you know who closes the gap? And this is our unfair advantage, and this is the beauty of Christianity, is that the thing that closes the gap is Christ himself. This is a principle that we have to get and understand. And this is a principle that Paul talks about. But he talks about how we should boast in our weaknesses, because where we are weak, Christ is strong. Christ is strong. So what happens is when we start recognizing Christ within our being, we start recognizing who he really is and what he did on the cross and all these different things, then we can actually be in a state of freedom. The goal here is we have to recognize Christ within our being. Because when we recognize Christ, he will take that gap and he'll close the gap of who we are and who we think we are. He will change our identity. So how do we do this? So there's a 2-step process. Number one is we have to recognize ourselves on the cross. Because when Christ died, and this is the beauty, this is the mystical aspect of Christianity. When Jesus Christ died on the cross, he didn't just die for you. He didn't just die for your sins. He died as you. On that cross, mystically, you were included with him on that cross. And so every part of you, the old part of you that wasn't as it was created to be, died with him on that cross. So again, when you look at the gap, all the stuff that you're showing up as now, that's a disconnect from how you know you need to show up as and how you're created to show up as. All that stuff, it died on the cross. And so what we get to do, and this is the beauty of it, we get to go back to the cross and we get to reckon ourselves as having died. So we get to recognize all those parts of ourselves that are not showing up well as having died on the cross. So I can say, I can lay it down at the foot of the cross, say, oh, I can reckon myself as having died. So this part where I'm insecure and I'm not showing up in confidence and all these different things, I can lay that on the cross. I can picture myself, I can envision myself as dying on the cross with him, that when he died, I died with him. And that part of me that was not confident, that showed up with rough edges, that was not as it was created to be, it died off with him on the cross. And so what we do is you want to take each part of those things and you want to see it. Each part of you that right now as you're showing up and as you see yourself, that is not as God created you to be and as you need to be with the vision that he gave you. You see that and go through the list of every part and see that dying as not being part of who you are anymore. Because that's the freedom that Christ established on the cross. He died so we could reckon ourselves to be dead with him. So we could mystically see ourselves as one with that death and relate with that death and take on the death of Christ as our own, so we can see ourselves as having died to the old past self. Make sense? That's the first thing. Second part is the resurrection, right? So Christ didn't just die, he also resurrected. And so in the same way that we can picture ourselves as having died with him, and every part of who we are that doesn't line with the vision that he gave us and who we need to show up as, and we can recognize every part of it dead. At the same time, we can recognize ourselves as having resurrected with him. So Christ, this is where we recognize Christ within us in every aspect, to where these weaknesses that we had, we laid them down, we saw them as being dead, but we're rising again. And when we're rising again and resurrecting, we're taking hold of his strengths and recognizing them within us. That makes sense? So now, if my lack of confidence died on the cross, then his confidence in me and his confidence is what I'm resurrected with. So I can recognize that. So we let it die, we envision it, we see it, we relate on with the cross as it having died, and then we take back the opposite of that thing of who Christ is within us. So he's fully confident. So I can trust in his confidence. So I'm going to resurrect with that confidence. And I'm going to thank him for that confidence and recognize it within me. So it's Christ in me, the hope of glory. The hope of glory, which means the hope of who God is to shine through me, right? And so I'm going to recognize him within my being, within my midst. So therefore, I'm confident. In myself, I'm not confident. But that old self died on the cross, and I rose again with Christ. And so now I'm confident because his confidence shines through me. Again, it's not my own, it's his confidence. So therefore, you can't mess it up. Does that make sense? Because it's not based on me. It's based on what he did. And so he's already done it. So therefore, I have fullness of confidence. I lack of no confidence. And when I start seeing that and envisioning that in myself, then all of a sudden, I start getting freedom from everything that was holding me back when it comes to that confidence thing. Make sense? At the core, that's how we reestablish our identity and how we start thinking differently about ourselves. Again, the first step is we have to recognize the gap. Like God gave us a vision. So who do we need to be to step into that vision? And how are we showing up currently? And there's a gap. And the more clear we are and the more just honest we are with ourselves with this, the better it is. Because then once we recognize the gap, we take it to the cross, we recognize the old self is dying and the new self is resurrecting. And as we do that, that's the second thing, is recognize Christ within me. And then the third thing is just the simplicity of doing this every day, where we just stay in Christ on a daily basis. And this is where we, on a consistent basis, we recognize ourselves as being dead with him and rising up with him. It's a daily invitation to keep our eyes locked in on Christ instead of ourselves. Because when we just look at ourselves, we're always going to see our weaknesses. And those weaknesses, the more what we focus on, we empower. So if we focus on our weaknesses, we'll always empower those weaknesses. But if we look at those weaknesses and we boast in them to where we replace them then with Christ's power and his strength, so we're replacing our weaknesses with his strength, and we focus on his strength within us on a daily basis, then all of a sudden we're going to start living by his strength. And the hindrances that were there to keep us stuck are not going to be there anymore. So this is what I do on a daily basis, by the way. And this is the invitation. Or this is what I try to do on a daily basis. I don't always do it. But when I do, I'm always show up better. Because here's what I do. I wake up in the morning. I'm like, okay, what am I feeling? I gauge what I'm feeling. Oh, I don't feel like I'm good at showing up. I feel like I'm going to self-sabotage again. I feel like I'm going to reject myself. I feel rejected. I feel disconnected. I feel whatever the thing is. I look at what I'm feeling and just recognize the reality of it, because that's my gap, right? I'm recognizing the gap of who I'm created to be versus how I'm showing up and how I'm feeling in that moment. See, a lot of people, they just try to overpower what they're feeling, and it doesn't work. But no, you got to fully face what you're feeling, recognize it, fully face it. And I don't feel powerful this morning, God. I feel like a loser. I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like people aren't going to trust me, like I'm untrustworthy, right? I recognize it. But then I'm like, okay, I recognize that and I let it die. But then I pick up, who is Christ within me? Oh, thank you, God, that you are confident, that you are trustworthy, that you show up well for people, that you are powerful. And I thank you that you are powerful within me, that every part of me is now powerful because you're in me. And so I recognize his strength within me instead of trying to build up my own strength, right? Which is easier way to do it. So that's the nice thing that we have with Christ. And so this changes me. If I do that every day that I do that, and I'm taking time to recognize my feelings, identify where I'm actually at and where how it disconnects, I'm recognizing the gap, and then I'm thanking God for who he is. So be real, be honest, recognize the gap. Don't just try to overpower your feelings. That doesn't work. Instead, recognize it, then thank him for who he is within you. Recognize his strength within you because he is fully within you. He's not withholding anything from you. There's no lack within him because where you are weak, he is strong. And so that's what we're recognizing. We're recognizing his strength within us. And when you do this consistently, it will remove those limitations that you've set on yourself that have limited your businesses, that have limited your growth in life, your relationships, everything included, right? It'll change that. And it'll change the way you see yourself. In fact, all in all, this is what's going to happen. When you follow these 3 steps that we just outlined, you're actually going to change your identity and the way that you see yourself. Because you're going to see yourself according to Christ's strength instead of your own weaknesses and the things that you're not good at. And so when you start identifying yourself as that, then your actions that you take are going to show up. You're going to take different actions. You're going to be more powerful in the way that you take your actions and the actions that you take. Because it's going to become more natural because it's from who you are within and who you perceive yourself to be. And so those actions will happen, which will create better outcomes. And these better outcomes will improve your life. And you'll actually get that vision that you have. So it'll change your identity. So if you have a 7-figure vision, by focusing on Christ and his strength, it will give you a 7-figure identity that will then help you take 7-figure actions that will give you an outcome of the 7-figure vision. Make sense? That's how it works. It's very simple, straightforward. But when you do this consistently, you're going to actually completely change your life. And that's why I'm sharing this video, because I believe that if we start thinking differently about the way we perceive ourselves, then our actions will change and therefore it will shift our outcomes. And so follow along with this. Take time to do this on a daily basis. Take time to recognize right now what are the big gaps, and then recognize who Christ is within you, and then get that routine going on a daily basis to say yes to who Christ's strength is within you, what his strengths are within you, and saying yes to that and letting go of the old. If you do that consistently, I guarantee it will change every aspect about you. You're going to show up differently, and therefore you're going to get different outcomes in life, which are better and are more aligned to what he wants to give you. Because the reason we are not stepping into the visions that God gives us because our identity doesn't match the vision. And so we need to shift our identity so we can step into the vision. And that's the way to do it. So again, what are the 3 steps? Let's recap quick. Number 1 is you want to recognize the gap of how you're showing up and how you need to show up for your vision. Number 2 is recognize the old you as having died with him and the new you as having been resurrected with him. Recognize Christ within you. And then number 3 is create a daily routine to start recognizing Christ in you every single morning. So you're recognizing your feelings, being honest, letting them die, and recognize Christ's strengths. Trading your weaknesses for his strength within you and recognizing it overpowering every part of you. You do that on a consistent basis, I guarantee it will change your life, and you will be able to show up to be the person that you need to be, to step into the identity and the vision that God has given you. And it will change every part of you. So if you like this video, subscribe, share it with other people. I'd love to hear more of what you're thinking and what is your identity? What are some things that you're shifting in your mind and in your heart as you're just watching this? And I hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you in the next video.